Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your guest and your host, and our guest for this evening is Eben Emerson, and we've just left you in South America. You're getting your first taste of the Catholic Church,
yes.
But you were jumping a little bit ahead of yourself, evaluating with a little bit of hindsight, but at the time you weren't feeling probably the least bit guilty about helping these Catholics discover Jesus Christ, right?
No, I wasn't feeling guilty about helping them discover Jesus Christ, but I did have a great respect for the Catholic Church, even though I'd been indoctrinated and taught how false the church was. I remember going into the cathedral in downtown and seeing the reverence and honor that they had for the church, and later learning about the Eucharist. But I would say that was the first time that I ever came face to face with Catholicism. And even though I was out to change it, it still put a face, and it put people with a religion that I had probably demonized.
All right. So did you come back more committed then at that point to being a minister, I presume, right?
Yeah. In fact, I remember coming toward the end of my time there in Ecuador, I wasn't sure what I would do. I didn't know if I would move back to home and go to the University of Arkansas, or go home and start a business, or whatever. I knew that I would always remain involved in some type of ministry within the church, the Churches of Christ. But after some prayer, I decided that I'd go back to the institute that I had done the initial program of 8 months with, and they have a 2-year ministry training program. And I went through their program, and even though there were different emphases within the minister training program, whether it's missions or preaching or youth ministry, I knew I would do missions, but I still did the preaching emphasis. Probably because I had spent the time on the field, I wanted more education in the area of homiletics and of presentation of preaching. I graduated from there. It took 2 years. Preached for very small congregations in West Texas and New Mexico, predominantly Spanish congregations, because by this time I was fluent in Spanish, and so I felt comfortable enough to do that. Whenever I graduated, though, a friend of mine was moving back to Mexico City, and he said, hey, you're familiar with how to do the cell groups, home-based churches, you speak the language, come back, why don't you come with us? I said, okay, cool, I'll go help. And so I moved down there for a year, and I helped in a very small way with a church plant, which was all cell-based, home-based churches, and stayed there for a year. There was really no place. Mexico City was enormous, and it was kind of overwhelming to me, honestly. Came back after that.
You're a country boy.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's no place for a hick in Mexico City. And I came back, and I went to LCU and Lubbock Christian University, which is in the same town that this institute, Sunset, is in. The only reason I went to LCU is because at this time all of my friends were in Lubbock, my social network, and I'd been there, whether indirectly through the program or whether directly going through this 2-year program. All of my friends on my social network was there, and they just happened to have a Church of Christ University. So I went back and I did my degree with every intention of graduating and moving back to Latin American field. But I wanted to be married, and I wanted to get my college education because it's something that was very, very valued in my family. So went through the school, and I worked, continued to preach at small congregations in eastern New Mexico and in West Texas, and I worked at a gym and took a whole bunch of hours. I think I graduated in 3 years, and met a girl by the name of Jennifer at the time, Jennifer McGuire, and we started dating, and she was Catholic. And
oops.
Yeah, oops is right. And obviously she fell very deeply in love with me. And I wasn't too sure. Actually, she wasn't too sure. I liked her immediately. She has a wonderful character. But she was Catholic. And as we got to be a little more serious, I knew that I could not date a Catholic. I couldn't seriously consider marrying someone that I thought was lost. Mm-hmm. So pull out the resources that I've been using ever since I'd first learned how to teach Catholics and used them on her, and she was ready to become a member of the Church of Christ. She didn't do it because of me. She's much too sensible for that, much more so than her husband. But she did it because she wanted to be a member of the right church, and I showed her that the Church of Christ was the right church. Yep. So she left the Catholic Church. And now her family has been Catholic since Peter, and been Catholic a very long time, and it caused quite a disturbance with her and with the new boyfriend and the rest of the family. And they didn't really appreciate what I had done. They were worried about her, and so I remember during this time, though, that her mom gave me a copy of Born Fundamentalist, Born Again Catholic. Mm-hmm. And I just want to give a little plug real quick.
David Carey's wonderful
book.
Yeah.
If you come from a fundamentalist background, I think that book speaks very well to you, because the language that it uses and the way that it presents the Catholic Church is more geared towards someone with a fundamentalist background. And sometimes I think that, I think that it speaks better to somebody with a fundamentalist background. Yep. And so I read the book, and it shook me up. It shook me up a great deal. And I was almost ready, after reading that book, to admit that they were Christian, possibly, if they were really faithful and believed everything in this book. But I probably wouldn't feel comfortable if somebody was a member of that church, especially if I was going to be in a relationship with them. So I kind of just put that on the back burner. Well, during this time that all this is going on, me and my wife, our girlfriend at the time, we develop a better relationship. It becomes pretty evident that we're going to get married. I propose. I'm looking for churches to do full-time work with. And
you've graduated.
I graduated,
Yep.
And I get a call to be youth minister for a small congregation up in the Panhandle of Texas. And so we move up there, or I move up there, and Jennifer followed and attended college at a school just north of there. And we dated for a little while before we were married there, but it became evident to me pretty quickly that I was not geared for youth ministry. That's what I was hired as, and I think that you have to have a giftedness and an ability to do that well, and I did not, and that was pretty evident. Now, I was able to fake it pretty well, but so I started looking for another church to go to, but it just so happened that the minister where I was at was asked to leave, and they said, well, would you consider taking this role? And I said, absolutely. And so after a trial period, I became the minister, and I loved it. And decided about 2 or 3 years into it with this congregation, I said, I think I'll go back to school and do my master's. There's a couple of good universities that are close, and it'd be a great time to do that. So I did.
Now, by this time, are you married?
Yes, by this time I was married.
And she's become a pastor's wife?
Yeah, she's a minister's wife, and we're filling the role very well. She's at this time, she taught for a year in the local high school, and I was the local Church of Christ preacher and member of the Rotary Club, and everything fit. She worked with the 4-H club, and so we were the atypical or the typical small town Church of Christ preacher couple, and it was a position that I loved, and in fact I really have a great respect for the people there, and they loved us, and they cared for us, and they did more for me and taught us more than I think I ever taught them.
Now, you said become masters wasn't always necessary for a Church of Christ minister, right?
No, not always. I had the ministry training, the 2-year program, and a lot of ministers only do that. Some only go through university. I happened to be fortunate enough to do both. But I did go ahead and go back and do a master's because I knew that I would probably go to a larger congregation eventually, and most of them wanted someone with a master's. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Come to Jesus. Come to Jesus. Come to Jesus.